don't know me, I'm sure I know most all of you, but I'm Professor Jody Russell Manning. I'm the Associate Director for the Rowan Center for the Study of Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights, and we are very honored to have an amazing scholar and dear friend speak tonight. Dr. Joanna Sliwa is a historian of the Holocaust and Polish Jewish history. She works as a historian and administrator of the Saul Kagan Fellowship for Advanced Shoah Studies and of the University Partnership Program in Holocaust Studies at the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, also known as the Claims Conference. The Claims Conference is the only NGO that negotiates with the German government for compensation for Jewish Holocaust survivors. She has also worked with the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, or the JDC, and at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And as a professor, she taught a graduate course at Kane University, as well as undergrad courses at Rutgers University. Joanna has also served as faculty advisor and educator in the Master Teacher Institute in Holocaust Education at the Alan and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life at Rutgers. My students here at Rowan, most of them on this side of the room, I see you've paired up on that side, have read a lot of her impressive work. My historical method students each semester read Jewish Childhood in Krakow. This is a book that introduces these students not only to microhistories, but more importantly, to think about how children experience the Holocaust differently than men and women. In addition, and I think one of the most important things with her book as well, is that it doesn't just lump men, women, and children together. She really exposes this idea that the experiences of men are different than experiences of women and experiences of girls and boys as well. Her new work is on older Jews, is that correct? Okay, the title, but on older Jews. So looking at another aspect of how a group experienced genocide very differently. And our center book club, of course, this semester has been her book, The Counterfeit Countess, and my Nazi camp system students who are also here have read this book as well, and we look forward to hearing more about it tonight. It's really an almost unbelievable story, and I'm sure you're going to talk a lot about the history of it and how you came to work on it. But I also must point out that Joanna and I have had a long history together, as we went to grad school together and have spent much time in conferences, archives. I have a really embarrassing picture, which I did not put up, of us at the Jewish Historical Institute working together. And just to let you know, my students, we have written many critical analysis papers in our lifetime, yes? So I'm passing that on to my students as well. But I am beyond honored to have you here tonight. So could you please join me in welcoming Dr. Joanna Sliwa.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Manning, Jody, for this generous, wonderful introduction. I am very touched, and it's really, really meaningful for me that you are reading my work and are writing these amazing papers that your professor has been telling me about. So thank you so much. I am very honored to be here at Rowan University. It's my first time here. I'm from New Jersey, but it's my first time here on campus, and it is a beautiful campus. I had an opportunity to see around a little bit, and I'm very happy to be here. I am honored by the invitation from the Rowan Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights. And it is a privilege for me to give this Dr. Paul B. Winkler lecture, and I thank the co-organizers very much for this, who are already named, and I don't want to miss out on any of them, but thank you so much for this. And of course, I'm grateful to Professor Manning, Jody, for believing in the importance of the history that I will tell you about today. The program takes place at an important time for at least two reasons. One is, of course, it's the 10th anniversary of the program, as I've learned today. But I will talk about two different reasons. One is it's Women's History Month, and the extraordinary but true story that I tell with my co-author, who's not here, Elizabeth Barry White, focuses on the survival of one Jewish woman during the Holocaust and on her rescue, resistance, and relief activities. The book also pays tribute to the many women who were thrust into the roles of resistors and rescuers because of World War II. And the second reason why this is an important time to hold a program such as this is that this month we commemorate the onset of Operation Reinhard, which was the Nazi plan to murder over 2 million Jews in German-occupied Poland. The protagonist of Barry's and my book witnessed the beginning and end of Operation Reinhard in Lublin, the city which was the headquarters of this German operation action. As a professional Holocaust historian, I have read hundreds of accounts of Holocaust survivors, memoirs, diaries, letters, testimonies. I have listened to hundreds of oral histories. Each story is unique, of course. One story that a fellow Holocaust historian, Barry White, shared with me in 2018 was so astonishing that it made me reevaluate what I knew about Jewish survival and resistance during the Holocaust. And today, I would like to share that story with you. In August 1950, a Polish Jewish woman appeared at the Canadian military mission in Berlin, Germany. She introduced herself as Pepi Josefa Zofia Melberg, and you see those names on this image here. The Canadian officials expected her and had immigration papers ready for her. She would soon join her husband, the Polish Jewish philosopher, Dr. Henry Melberg, in Canada. Henry had arrived there in 1949 on an academic fellowship at the University of Toronto. His wife would join him in 1950 as a research assistant at that university. Once in Canada, she presented herself as Dr. Josephine Janina Bednarski-Spinner Melberg, mathematician. These were only two out of several reinventions that Janina used during her lifetime. And despite her many names, I will call her Janina, the name that she began using in 1941 when she was 36 years old, and the name that she retained for the rest of her life. In Toronto, Janina and Henry were rebuilding their lives. They survived the war in German-occupied Poland. They fled from communist Poland. They were free in Canada. However, there was one thing that Janina felt she could not freely share with anyone but her closest friends. Who would have believed the Melbergs that during the Holocaust, they assumed false identities as Polish aristocrats? Who would have believed Janina that as a Polish Christian countess, she joined the Polish resistance and a Polish relief organization to help Polish victims of Nazi persecution? Who would have believed her that she entered the Majdanek concentration camp where 63,000 Jews were murdered to bring aid to the prisoners? And would anyone find it credible that she negotiated face-to-face with German and Nazi officials in Lublin? And if she disclosed the details of her wartime activities, would she be endangering the people who helped her and who were still living in communist Poland? So for many years, Janina remained silent. in that she was not unusual among Holocaust survivors. Some did not want to talk about their experiences. They focused on the present and the future. Some of them kept their wartime identities, and so they did not speak about their former lives. Other survivors found that few, if anyone, who had not experienced the Holocaust showed interest in what the survivors went through and what happened to their families and their communities. Of course, there were survivors who were outspoken about their experiences, who documented them. And then there were those who, like the Mellbergs, discussed their losses, suffering, and survival in their native languages, in small meetings with fellow survivors. The situation changed in 1961 with the trial in Israel of Adolf Eichmann, the German official responsible for organizing the deportations of Jews to camps. The focus on the testimonies of Jewish Holocaust survivors began to break the long-held silence about the horrors that they had witnessed and endured. By then, by 1961, Janina found herself in a new country where no one except her closest pre-war friends even knew that she was Jewish. In 1956, the Mellbergs immigrated to the United States. Chicago is where they found professional opportunities that they yearned for. Henry became a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago, and Janina rose to the rank of tenured full professor of mathematics at the Illinois Institute of Technology, a unicorn among women mathematicians at the time. You see her here teaching a class at IIT in the 1960s. While Janina was focused on her life in the US, she could not ignore what was happening in her native country, Poland. The official Polish narrative equated the suffering of Jewish and non-Jewish Poles during World War II. It also presented Poles as these noble resistors and rescuers, and Jews as passive victims, but also ungrateful recipients of aid. Janina knew that this was not only a distortion of history, but also a denial of what happened. She knew that she had to break her silence. So she decided to record some of what she saw and did during the war. She recognized the urgency of doing that, especially in March 1968. What you're seeing on these images are snapshots from protests sponsored by the government, and a prominent sign here that says Zionists to Israel. The Polish government expelled about 30,000 Jews, accusing them of disloyalty in a campaign that the government dubbed anti-Zionist, but in fact was anti-Semitic. Ordinary Poles harassed their Jewish neighbors. Many survivors feared that Jews would once again be subjected to a genocide. Janina passed away in May 1969, so a year after this anti-Semitic campaign. She was 64 years old. The memoir that she wrote before her death was meant to dispel the Polish government's myths, document the suffering of Jews and non-Jews in Poland as she witnessed and experienced it, and reveal a completely different side to Jewish responses to persecution. She wrote it in Polish for a Polish audience, and her husband translated the memoir to English. Still, her story remained unknown. Janina Mellberg claimed that she survived the Holocaust in German-occupied Poland under the false identity of the Countess Suchodolska, a Polish Christian aristocrat. Using this guise, she became an official in a Polish welfare organization in the city of Lublin. And the map shows German-occupied Poland during World War II, called General Government. Lublin was both a city and a district. And you see it, wait, where's it? Right here. Thanks to her fluent German and her aristocratic status, the Countess was assigned to negotiate with Nazi and SS officials in Lublin for measures to help Poles. It seemed from her memoir that she never took no as the final answer, but would go over the officials' heads until she found one who would tell her yes. And when she got to yes, she considered it an invitation to ask for even more. One focus of Janina's work was providing aid to prisoners in Majdanek. This was a Nazi concentration camp at the edge of Lublin. You see it right here. She badgered the SS to allow her organization to deliver ever more greater quantities of food and supplies. Eventually, her organization delivered massive quantities of food for thousands of prisoners 5 days a week. Such a program did not exist in any other concentration camp. Janina made these deliveries herself and persuaded the SS to let her take them inside the camp, right up to the gates of the 5 prisoner compounds that are marked here on the map as fields. Once she obtained that access, she used her deliveries as a cover to smuggle messages with resistance members who were imprisoned in the camp, because she was also an officer in the home army of the Polish resistance. And she didn't just smuggle messages. She brought in everything from books to medical equipment to razor blades and wire cutters to organize escapes. This is some of the information that a historian of Majdanek, Barry White, read in the memoir. And you see the first page of that memoir. Barry was astonished, to say the least. She received a carbon copy of Janina's memoir out of the blue in 1989 from a professor from the University of Florida. He explained that this was a true story and that he had promised his late colleague, Dr. Henry Melberg, to find a publisher for it. But no one was interested. Even an eminent American Holocaust historian remarked that perhaps this was an interesting story, but a story of one woman did not merit a publication. Barry had no way of verifying Janina's story at the time. She was working full-time in the US Justice Department as a historian, a Nazi hunter, actually. There was no internet at the time, hard to believe for students today, I'm sure. No internet. The archives in communist Poland were closed, and Barry did not know Polish. By 2017, Barry asked herself if she was the only person who knew that Countess Janina Suchodolska was Jewish. If so, did Barry have a responsibility to tell the story? In 2018, Barry connected with me, and the result of our genealogical and historical research in 9 countries is the book published in 2024, The Counterfeit Countess. Through our research, we corroborated Janina's memoir with archival records. We also discovered that Janina's life and activities were even more amazing than what she presented in her memoir. In 1939, Janina and Henry lived a comfortable life in Lvov. Today, that's Lviv, Ukraine. She was a mathematics teacher, and he taught French. And you see their beautiful pictures here. They earned their doctorates in philosophy from the prestigious university in Lvov. Janina's achievement was even advertised in the city's Jewish paper. But it says here that it's spinner Pepi from Żurawno. So what does the name Pepi Spinner have to do with Janina? That was the name that her Jewish parents gave her. Pepi grew up in a small town in what today is Ukraine and what used to be Poland before World War II. Because of her family's status and quite unusual upbringing, Janina was educated by private tutors. She mingled with the local nobility. And that is how she acquired the languages, the mannerisms, and the behavior that would later help her fool the Nazis. When Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland and divided it between themselves, Lvov fell to the Soviets. Janina understood that she had to be really cunning and creative to avoid deportation to Siberia. That was a destination for thousands of people whom the Soviet authorities considered enemies of the state. When Soviet soldiers came to inspect the Mellberg's apartment, Janina showed composure, and she managed to persuade the soldiers that she and her husband were only teachers and that they came from working-class families. This allowed the Mellbergs to keep their apartment. In June 1941, their situation changed again. Lvov became occupied by Germany. The Ukrainian population staged a series of pogroms against their Jewish neighbors, murdering even as many as 4,000. And here you see a photograph from one such pogrom and attack on the Jewish population of Lvov. Soon, German forces were organizing regular roundups and shootings of Jews. Janina managed to save her husband from one such shooting. She followed the group of men being led by Ukrainian militiamen. Her stubborn request to release her husband caught the interest of a German soldier. He was impressed, and he assured her that her husband would return. And he did. This situation taught Janina the need to remain proud, persistent, and refrain from judging people. But how long would they be able to survive? When a German order was plastered throughout the city, ordering Jews into a newly created ghetto, the Mellbergs understood that this could spell the end for them. At this point, Janina's family friend came to the Mellbergs' rescue. Count Andrzej Skrzyński, you see him after the war getting married to his fourth wife, arrived in Lvov on the first civilian train out of Lublin. He promised the Mellbergs that if they go with him to Lublin, he would give them false papers and protect them. So they agreed. The journey to Lublin was dangerous because the Jews, because the Mellbergs as Jews could not travel. There was a prohibition for Jews to use public transportation. And yet, Skrzyński's smuggling mission was successful until it almost wasn't. At the train station, a German official detained Henry, saying that he broke a baggage regulation. So Janina sprang into action. She mustered all her courage to confront the policeman and urge him to release Henry. Her ruse worked. It was that incident that enabled Janina's intervention from a mathematics teacher, from an ordinary woman living in Lvov, into the Countess, who would face Nazi officials in Lublin to permit and then to extend relief efforts for non-Jewish Poles. And before I move on, I just want to show you the journey that they took from Lvov to this city right here, and then up on north to Lublin. It was a long journey and was extremely dangerous. In Lublin, Count Skrzyński gave the Melbergs their false identities as Polish Christian aristocrats, so Piotr and Janina Suchodolski. German-occupied Poland became the laboratory for the Nazis to develop and test their racist utopia. By the end of 1939, the special task forces called Einsatzgruppen shot about 40,000 Poles and 7,000 Polish Jews in a plan to eliminate Poland's intelligentsia. A massive ethnic cleansing campaign followed. The German authorities planned to remove even as many as 8 million Poles and Jews from areas that they annexed to the Reich, to Germany, and dump them in the general government in German-occupied Poland. The German forces also embarked on a campaign of destruction of Poland's cultural and national treasures, on mass-scale looting, and the exploitation of the Polish people. The fact that Janina and Henry hid their Jewish identities did not mean that they were safe from persecution. Now they feared Nazi anti-Jewish policy, Nazi anti-Polish policy. It was brutal, but of course it was less deadly than the Nazi policy that was aimed against Jews. And on these photographs, you see some of these examples of the brutality of Nazi policy. And you see the labels, of course, so you can read them. In the photograph there, it is a transport to a shooting action in a forest. Here is a monument being toppled, and an expulsion campaign from Polish villages of Polish peasants. And you see women, children, men. By the time the Melbergs arrived in Lublin in December 1941, the 40,000 Jews living there had been confined to a ghetto for 9 months. In mid-March 1942, the German authorities inaugurated Aktion Reinhard, the Operation Reinhard that I mentioned earlier, the largest mass murder operation of the Holocaust. Within a month, they murdered 28,000 Jews and transferred the remaining Jews from Lublin from the city center to another ghetto. And Janina witnessed the Jews' tragedy. She understood that this could be her fate too. So she resolved to help those people whom she could. And these images show you what the ghetto in Lublin looked like. There are many more photographs that you can certainly find online. Count Skrzyński, so the man who rescued Janina and her husband, sponsored Janina's membership into the Polish Home Army. This was the military wing of the Polish underground state. It was a secret resistance organization that answered to the Polish government in exile in London. Janina assumed an alias at this organization, Stefania. She became Skrzyński's right hand in the main welfare council. This was an organization that was approved by the German authorities to provide help to non-Jewish Poles. There were separate organizations for the Ukrainian minority and a separate relief organization for Jews. What this meant was that Janina was responsible for organizing help for victims of expulsions, for interceding for the release of hostages, for providing food to those who were in need in camps and prisons, but also ensuring that other people in the district had food and medicine and clothes, children and adults. While Janina was involved in those endeavors, in those official endeavors, she was also focused on another, more secret, daring goal. So, Janina did not operate alone, and her memoir, pays tribute to the many women who worked with her to resist the German occupiers and to help each other survive. Oops. Many of these women she worked with directly, and I just want to draw your attention to two of them. So Saturnina Malm was a woman who was the first one to establish a network of help with prisoners in Majdanek. She also managed to save a Jewish girl. The girl survived the war. Stefania Pejanowska was tortured by the Gestapo 15 times before she was transferred to the Majdanek concentration camp. And there she established a hospital, an infirmary, to help imprisoned women and children. Now, what motivated Janina to risk her life to court death by going every day into Majdanek? Henry wrote in a preface to the memoir that Janina was guided by a simple mathematical formula. One life has a lesser value than multiple lives, and her own life would have no value if she did not use it to save others. Henry also wrote that Janina's memoir was a testimony. She testifies not only about her wartime experiences, but also about the lessons that she learned from observing human nature in the midst of the horrors of occupied Poland. She wrote about enemies who were conducting terrible crimes, and yet who took risks to help, even save her. She wrote about the Poles, who were courageous and venal, self-sacrificing, and hateful. She found that she could not predict when someone would help or harm her in a given situation based solely on a person's ideology, religion, or ethnicity. The German rule of Poland came to an end in July 1944. Before that happened, German authorities deported about 1,000 prisoners from Majdanek to Auschwitz. And later that night, in July, the Soviet army liberated Majdanek. Nearly 500 prisoners were still in the camp. That's 6 months earlier than Auschwitz. In fact, Majdanek was the first major concentration camp that was freed. The Soviet soldiers publicized the horrific evidence of genocide that they encountered in the camp. Here you see a still from one of the movies that was filmed by Soviet soldiers, and here you see canisters of Cyclone B gas that was used to murder victims. But few in the West believed the Soviets, thinking that this was Soviet propaganda. Janina testified to the Soviet Commission for the Investigation of Nazi Crimes. After the war, she accompanied international visitors to the former camp. And she ended her memoir with a description of a tour that she took in Majdanek with the Swedish delegation. She offered insights into her motivations for not lying low to survive under the false identity, but to risk her life every day to help others. And I would like to quote from her memoir. "It would have been natural to give up, to stop going to Majdanek, to go to pieces even. But then there would have been no reason to live. When so many were in such terrible need, I had to live to answer that need. I was one individual only in the vast suffering human family. If I thought only of the dangers to myself or to those I loved, I was worth nothing. But if surviving meant being useful to many, I had to find the strength to survive, which made it possible for me to feel some sense of achievement, even of pride." When she gave that tour to the Swedish delegation, Janina was still hiding her identity. But she dropped the Countess from her title and added doctor to her name. and began introducing herself as Dr. Janina Suchodolska, social worker. She joined Poland's new social welfare organization and became its deputy director. On the other hand, her husband Henry returned to his pre-war identity and he resumed his academic career. He moved to another city where a new university was created. That city, Łódź, became the center for a renewed Jewish life where survivors settled, where they created their organizations, where there was assistance for them. At the local Jewish community, Henry registered his wife and himself under their pre-war names. So what that meant was that the Melbergs could be traced only by the people who had known them from before the war. And those people included Henry's two surviving brothers. These photos show a rare occasion when the family, so Henry and Janina and Henry's two brothers and their wives, were able to reunite. However, the rising anti-Semitic violence convinced all of them that they had to leave Poland. And all of them eventually did at different times. Barry and I have made it our mission to share Janina's story. Janina was an exceptional woman, a Holocaust survivor, a brilliant mathematician. Her amazing life story was unknown, her important voice silenced for so long. Janina's story teaches us many things. But I want to focus on one thing. It teaches us to listen to Holocaust survivors, to understand what they witnessed and experienced. It encourages us to focus on women's experiences, to give us another layer of understanding of survival strategies during the Holocaust and the scope and scale of resistance and rescue efforts. Janina's story also allows us to learn about the complexities of World War II, about Nazi genocide of the Jews, and the Nazi persecution of ethnic Poles. All that through the lens of one individual. Janina's last words in her memoir are, "We will remember." And may this pledge be something we adopt so that the names and histories of people who, just like us, hoped to build secure lives for themselves and their families are never forgotten. And in a world that is becoming increasingly divided and oriented toward excluding the other, may Janina's story and the stories of other survivors demonstrate the peril that we all face when we don't confront hate and when we don't protect the dignity of every human being. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to open it up to comments, questions.
I know you mentioned briefly at the end that Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 briefly impacted, like, how much of an impact do you think that had on your research? Do you think you would be able to get more information, or do you think there's any gaps currently because of that in your research?
That is such a wonderful question because it relates to, yes, to what was possible to research and what kind of questions are still unanswered. And when Barry and I began this project in 2018, we were planning out our research, meaning, first of all, we needed to know if the story was legitimate, if it was real. We also needed to find out if Janina Suchodolska was, in fact, Pepe's spinner. Was she Jewish? Can we find evidence for that, other than what is written in the preface to her memoir, right? As historians, we need to find that evidence. So we focused on that information first, And then as we came to know and learn more about Janina and about her pre-war life, then of course it made sense, and we made plans to go to Poland, where Janina lived and where she worked after the war, and to go to Ukraine to look in the archives in Lviv today. To look in the archives there if we could find anything more about her, anything more about her personal life, about her professional life. We also wanted to go to her hometown of Żurawno, which is a kind of a village right now. We wanted to go to the place where she spent time, to Henry's hometown. Janina lived there for some time. We wanted to see it. In order to write a story, a book like this, we needed to retrace her steps, to see what the environment looked like. Unfortunately, yes, first it was COVID that made it impossible for us to go to Poland for quite some time. And during that time, whenever possible, we worked together with archivists and librarians in Poland, but also elsewhere around the world, who very graciously and generously helped us to get documents that were already digitized. And to share whatever they had to help us with this story, because they also recognize the importance of telling this story. When it comes to Ukraine, we never went. We never had the opportunity to go. We started doing research in Ukrainian archives thanks to one of the philosophers who found Janina's dissertation. So we have copies of that, and I could read it because I read Polish, so I could read that. But we weren't able to proceed much further with that. We do hope that there will come a time when there will be peace in Ukraine, and that we can return and really do more research, because we're fascinated by this story. We want to learn more about Janina. I know that there are other research projects that are ongoing about Janina as a mathematician. So I am in touch with scholars, one scholar in Ukraine, and then with other scholars in Poland who are working on her. There's one scholar here in the U.S. Who was Janina's former student at IIT, who is working on a project about Janina and her impact on mathematics.
Just to piggyback off that real quick, because one of the questions I had when I first read this was, when you got to the Majdanek Memorial, did the historians know of her in this way, as at the memorial?
Yes. So, Jody, your question was about did the historians, the archivists at Majdanek Museum and Archives know about Janina and her story? Mm-hmm. Well, I will say they knew about the Countess Janina Suchodolska, and the Countess Janina Suchodolska appears in various accounts of survivors from the camp, in memoirs and in testimonies, but none of them mentioned that she was Jewish, because the people didn't know, the prisoners didn't know that they were receiving help from a Polish Jewish woman living under false identity. So the staff, the historians and archivists at the Majdanek Museum and Memorial were extremely helpful to us. We managed to go into Poland for our research trip. We spent a lot of time going on a tour with a historian of the camp to understand the landscape, the history of every place, the kind of geography of where the gates were, where the specific roads and the fields and so on, just to understand what Janina could have seen when she entered the camp, how she navigated with her trucks and trolleys into in the camp. So we worked very closely with the experts at Majdanek, and it was really thanks to us that they discovered too. They learned that that this Countess Suchodolska was actually Jewish. So that was news to everyone. No one knew about this.
Wow, remarkable. And thank you about technology. Sorry, we're still, yeah.
Yes, and one interesting thing is, about the information, goes back to your question about records in Ukraine. We believe that there is more information out there. So after we finished writing this book, one of the archivists from Majdanek reached out to me and said, here are two photographs of Janina taken after the war. And how did she discover that? Well, she was going around with this book that we sent her. We sent to the archivist at Majdanek. She was going around and telling her colleagues, look, the book is out. The authors finally put this on paper. And one of the archivist's colleagues looked at the name and said, oh, I think I have something in my drawer. And it turned out to be an envelope with photographs of Janina. So this kind of shows us that there is much more out there to be discovered.
Amazing. So we have a question online, and then we'll go.
So do you mind just repeating this afterwards? I'm going to read the three, and then so that everyone.
So I should repeat what the question. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do
Okay.
you mind if I ask all three from online? And
yes,
you can,
please.
Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah, figuring out technology. The first one is, and I read the book, which is amazing. But one of the questions is, do we know if she ever had any close calls where she feared being discovered? Which obviously you can talk, I know, quite extensively about, will be really interesting to hear. Another question, which you've addressed a little bit, but maybe you want to talk about more directly about, were there any holes in the narrative that required deeper investigation or just, challenges in trying to establish truth or verify the stories? And then the last question I have from online is, how did the testimony of the survivors of the camp help to verify her story? And where did you find the sources from the prisoners' perspective, especially given, how many passed away? So if you didn't mind, that would be wonderful.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you so much for these questions. So question one was about any close calls that Janina might have had during this time. Was she ever discovered? That is always a question, right? Well, she was never discovered or suspected of being Jewish. So good was her cover. And as I told you, she knew German. She knew the mannerisms, the customs of the upper classes. So she blended very well and could pretend that she was one of them. Her husband, on the other hand, did not have that same kind of background as Janina. So he could not really pass as an aristocrat, although he had this false identity as a count. So he was more, let's say, not hidden and in hiding, but not really out there, present in the same way that Janina. He was working as an egg engineer or in an agricultural cooperative. So he didn't really have any close calls. For Janina, her close calls were when the officials at Majdanek, some of the guards, for example, suspected that she was bringing in contraband and that she was in contact with members of the resistance, but they could never prove it to her. And there were many instances, and we write about it in the book, when Janina did something unofficially or smuggled things inside. And there were situations when she was nearly discovered, but she never wasn't. And so that gave her maybe even more courage to continue with her illicit activities. That doesn't mean that she was fearless. Sometimes we get this question, people say that, she was a fearless woman. Well, from her memoir, it's clear that she was constantly in fear of being discovered, of death, but that she decided that she would die anyway, sooner or later. That was her thinking, that the situation for Jews, for Poles was so bad, and the Nazi anti-Jewish and anti-Polish policy was very clear in terms of persecution and destruction, that she thought she would die anyway. So at least she would do something for other people, even at the risk of discovery. One time where she thought, she was pretty sure she would be discovered, but she proceeded anyway, was in spring of 1944, when there were transports of prisoners being moved from Majdanek to camps deeper in Nazi Germany. And Janina received the task of supplying razor blades, and alcohol to spike the beverages, the tea, or for the German soldiers, so to assist in escapes of prisoners from these transportation trains. And if this was discovered, then everybody would know, the Nazi officials, German officials would know who was supplying these items, because at that point, only Janina had permission to enter the camp from the outside. In terms of the second question about, I don't know if I understood this correctly, it's about the challenges and in telling the story. Yes, okay, so the question is about, were there challenges, gaps in the story, inconsistencies in the memoir? The short answer is yes. And if you study memoirs, right, when people write from memory, even imagine yourself writing about what happened to you, 10 years ago, right? There will be certain things that maybe you will remember incorrectly, a name, a spelling that will not be correct. In this case, we're talking about a survivor who wrote her memoir in the 1960s, so several years after the end of the war. She did not have any of her documents. She escaped from Poland. She couldn't have any documents on her. She couldn't have any photographs, nothing. So she had to recreate everything from her memory. She, of course, knew the names of the German officials with whom she met and with whom she negotiated. But sometimes, some of the names are misspelled, right? So, of course, this is easy for a historian to go back into the archival record and to verify this. There were some mistakes in the memoir with dates about when things happened or the chronology. So Barry and I had to look at the memoir with critical eyes, and also to look at what we knew about Holocaust, World War II history, about the progression of the war, of the fighting, and how that impacted the evolution of the events in Janina's memoir. And of course, we had to look in the archival records from, for example, the Polish Main Welfare Council, the organization that Janina worked for, and that provided us a wealth of information. And there was nothing in the memoir that Janina lied about. In fact, the memoir didn't contain all the amazing things that she did. For example, she never mentioned in the memoir that she negotiated for the release of 3,600 Polish peasants in the summer of 1943. And these were children, these were women, these were older people who were expelled from their villages. Their homes, their barns, their fields were burnt. And these people were placed in the Majdanek camp. They were not considered prisoners, so they did not have access to certain things that prisoners had access to. They were basically dumped outside in the camps in the scorching heat. So when Janina found out about this, she decided to do everything that she could to get the release of these people. And she negotiated with this man right here, Hermann Hoffel. You see his name here, his picture here, and these are some of the German officials with whom she negotiated. Anyway, she went to Hermann Hoffel. This was a German official responsible for who he was the manager of Operation Reinhardt. He had blood of thousands of Jews on his hands when Janina visited him in summer 1943 to demand the release of these men, women, and children. But in the end, Janina only received into her care about 2,000 of those people because the rest had died. And so she didn't view this as a success. She viewed this as a failure. And she did not include this information in her memoir. We discovered it in the archival record. And the third question was about verifying the story using testimonies from Majdanek survivors. And of course, Barry and I read many accounts submitted by survivors from Majdanek. also memoirs, and some survivors do mention the Countess. The Countess used to come in and bring assistance. They sometimes mention as Countess Suchodolska. That's how they knew her, but no one ever knew that she was Jewish. I will tell you one incident that is kind of mentioned in several of these post-war accounts, and that is Christmas at Majdanek. And for those of you who read the book, know exactly what I'm talking about. For those who didn't read the book, that was Christmas of 1943. And so the starving prisoners rubbed their eyes in disbelief because they saw trucks, lorries coming into the camp with decorated Christmas trees, and canisters, with a sumptuous Christmas feast. That did not happen in other camps. It was incredible for these prisoners. And for a very long time, they remembered about this. They talked about it, that this gave them hope, that this also gave them, that this also affirmed them that there were people on the outside who were thinking of these prisoners in the camp. And these people on the outside also had it hard in procuring food. And still, they managed to come together to organize decorated Christmas trees. And they managed to find additional quantities of food to share with the prisoners in Majdanek. And interestingly, I did a program at the University of Warsaw a few weeks ago, and for philosophy professors, because Janina was a philosopher and a mathematician by training. And one of the professors, as she was listening to me, she said, well, she mentioned a particular name. She said, did Janina ever mention this woman? And I said, no, she never mentions it in her memoir, never mentions her in her memoir. It turns out that one of Janina's pre-war colleagues from the university was a prisoner in Majdanek. So it is very probable that when Janina was coming into the camp with her deliveries, and she had contact with, and she saw different prisoners, it's possible that her colleague recognized her, but never admitted that, never gave her out.
I'm good to go. Hi. My question is a little bit about gender. So when I was reading, I noticed that there were certain instances where she was able to almost like use her gender as an asset to kind of fly under the radar. And in the book, I know you said that one of the things that she thought was there was times during the war when a woman had kept her head when the men around them had lost hers. And I was just curious to what extent in her memoir, because I know not all of it is in here, like, did she talk about the complexity of gender in her memoir, or the fact that she was a woman? Like, to what extent did she discuss gender in her memoir?
Wonderful question about the role of gender in this story. Did it help her that she was a woman? Did it inhibit her actions? It helped her. The fact that she was a woman, that she had this status as a countess, that she was so well educated, all that helped her in the negotiations. And of course, as a woman, it was not impossible. It was hard to establish that she was Jewish. There's no physical marking. There was no physical marking on a Jewish woman, right? For Jewish men, it's different. They're circumcised. And at that time in pre-war Poland and wartime, only Jewish men were circumcised. So of course, it was easier to determine the Jewishness of a man. But for Janina, not so much. And so there are examples in the book where we discuss how Janina dealt with German officials when she walked into an office with other men, for example, Count Skrzyński, or with other people from the organization for which she worked. And the German officials still they were dealing with Poles, who were subhuman to them. But on the other hand, there was still some kind of consciousness of gender and respect for gender and class and respect for kind of class, social class. So during these meetings, the officials would invite would show for Janina to sit down. So she would sit down, and of course, the other men in the room with whom Janina came also would sit down. So this would also establish kind of relations already, and kind of from the very beginning. There was kind of like negotiating terms from the very beginning. So that helped her. In terms of other ways of moving around the district for her and other women with whom she worked, they had more flexibility in moving around and in going into other locations and villages and towns in the district to find out what was going on, what were the Polish people experiencing there. They were then writing reports, so the Polish organization knew, the Polish underground state knew what was happening. Women also participated from Janina's group, participated in rescuing children from transport, so they wouldn't be taken to Germany for forced labor. So there were many ways in which gender played a role, but it most definitely did.
Hi, I have a quick question on General Plan Ost and the German settlement in Poland. Did Janina have like a specific opinion on the settlers in Poland after the war? Because I know I mentioned there was, or I think you said 60,000 SS members in like Lublin specifically. Did she have an opinion on the settlers after the war as to what should happen with them or anything like that?
Okay, so the question was about the plan to settle Eastern Europe with German settlers who would establish farms and would have the Polish people, the Slavs, and not other Slavs, not only Poles, work for them as slaves, right, on those agricultural settlements. And your question was about if Janina had an opinion about this, like during the war, as it was happening, and after, especially after the war. No, she doesn't write about her assessment of that policy. She does write about the expulsions from the villages and the towns to make room for the German settlers. And her focus is more on how do we help those peasants who were removed from expelled from their homes, left with nothing.
Were you able to find out why the Count went back to rescue them, specifically why he risked his life for them?
Okay. So the question was about why did Count Skrzynski risk his life and hop on the train to go from Lublin to Lwów and then back to Lublin. This is a part that Barry and I would love to find out more about. And speaking of gaps, an earlier question, this is one of those gaps that we don't exactly know what the connection was between Count Skrzynski and Janina. We understand that he must have been a very close friend, not only of her because he was older than Janina, but of Janina's parents. In the course of doing genealogical research, and I did a lot of it about Polish aristocrats, trying to find out, who was this man, Count Skrzynski, what was his connection? So one thing that I did discover was that the Skrzynski family owned an estate in Żurawno, where Janina was born. So that might have been that connection, but we were not able to establish much more than that. In the course of writing the book, speaking of research and how do you do research for such a book? Well, social media was great in many respects. And after doing this genealogical research, I found a possible connection to someone. And I reached out on Facebook to the person, and I got an immediate response. And she said, "Oh, that is my aunt." And the aunt turned out to be the daughter of Count Skrzynski. So I was connected with the daughter of Count Skrzynski, and to her, this was news. She never heard this story. All she knew was that her father was an official in the Polish Main Welfare Organization in Lublin, and that after the war he was accused of collaborating with the Nazis, which was not true. He did not collaborate. He was doing everything he could, even through negotiating with Nazi officials, to help Polish people. But she she didn't know anything more. She didn't know that he rescued a Jewish couple. So I couldn't get much more information. We tried to find out the connection. How could Janina and her family know the Skrzynskis so well, but we couldn't establish that. But it had to be a close connection. Otherwise, who would risk their life to go and say, I will come with me. I will give you these identities. I will place you in a specific house with other aristocratic women. And I will put you in this, I'll give you work, and I will sponsor your membership in a resistance organization. There had to be some kind of a close relationship.
Yep. So near the end of the book, when she's trying to get back to Canada with her husband, there's a period of time when she's leaving Poland to East Germany, where in the book you say it's a mystery how she got there. Was there any documentation on that, or just maybe not reliable documentation? And then as a historian, when do you decide to, I've dug at this enough and it's just a mystery at this point?
Excellent question as well. And the question was about how was Janina able to get out of Poland? What do we know about it? And is there evidence? For a long time, we did not know. It was a mystery to us. How did she get out of Poland? We knew about the exchange of letters with Jewish organizations and Henry pleading with the Jewish organizations to get his wife out of Poland. We knew about that. But how was she able to get out? And it was much, much later, and with the help of a colleague, Dr. Adara Goldberg, whom Jody and I both are friends with, who's an expert on Holocaust survivors in Canada, who really perused all the archives, I would say, about survivors in Canada. And Adara recommended a particular archive to reach out there, and I did. And I was so touched when the archivist sent me a scan of the case file on Janina. And in that case file, it said that Janina escaped, that she defected to the Canadian representation in Berlin, and it contained all this other information. But it did not have Janina's testimony, which we are pretty sure had to be submitted. Janina had to give an account of how she fled and to establish her identity, especially since she didn't have any documentation on her. So we were not able to find out how she was able to do that. We did, in the course of the research, and thanks to a Jewish genealogist in Warsaw, we were connected with Henry's niece in England, who used to live with the Melbergs when she was a study abroad student. So she lived with them in Chicago. And she heard some snippets from her aunt and uncle about how they survived. And the niece did mention that Janina talked about how she fled and that she had nothing on her with her, and particular kind of details about it. But she said she didn't make much out of it at the time. She didn't quite understand what this all meant. And from reading survivor testimony, like other survivors who fled from Poland after the war, because of the anti-Semitism and violence and killings of Holocaust survivors, we know that some survivors were kind of concealed under trucks in these special made places under these huge trucks to smuggle them out of Poland. So that could have been Janina's case. We just don't know. I think it's hard as in a professional way, as a historian, but also in a personal way, as someone who gets so connected to the story, to kind of understand that there will be things that we will just not know. And it's okay. We will just not know about it. But it doesn't mean that we can't get the story out, that we should do as much research as possible about the story. But because it's so important, to share it and keep sharing it with the world. But the hope in me, I think that's kind of like maybe the optimist or naivety with me is that, maybe something will surface and we will find out more.
Okay, we have one maybe last question from online, which was, have you been approached about doing a movie? The Christmas trees coming in, so it seems just natural.
Okay, wonderful question too. I love all these questions. I think they're really great, insightful questions that really allow me to speak about the story and share with you more details. And in terms of what's next with this story, so of course our goal for Barry and for me is, like I said before, to share the story as widely as possible. Janina did not have children. She had 2 sisters. None of them had children. I mentioned the niece. So there is someone from the family, not Janina's direct family, but from Henry's family. So there's no one really to carry the story forward. And we do see a sense of responsibility to do that. In terms of wider interest in the book, I can tell you that there are several translations of the book around the world in Italian, Slovak, Russian. There will be a Finnish translation. There's a British edition, and there will be a Polish edition soon. And in terms of a film, I think, yes, we think this is such a great story for a film, and it just gives another perspective, a different perspective on how a Jewish woman, because this is an exceptional story, how this one Jewish woman resisted the Nazis, how she rescued people who were not Jews, who were Polish people, non-Jewish Poles. And we do have an agent. It sounds fancy, but we do have an agency in LA who is that is trying to shop this project and see if there is interest. There was some interest from filmmakers, but we are waiting for the right people to handle this, because we do think it's a very special, sensitive story that needs to be done right.
Thank you very much. I just want to say a couple things, if that's okay, before
Yes.
we thank you.
Yes.
So please make sure, if you've not signed in, that you sign in. Secondly, Joanna will be here, so if you have more questions or you want to ask her specific questions from the book or tonight's talk, please do so. You'll be staying around. If you brought a copy of your book, she's more than happy to sign it for you. And lastly, as our mentor says, when we speak about something bitter, we should have something sweet. So I invite you to have some water, and we have cookies as well. So please partake in that. And please, thank you so very much. Let's thank Joanna.
So thank you.